Hello, everyone, and welcome to Clinical Trials Digital Week, brought to you by the producers of the face-to-face clinical trial events, visiting Philadelphia in October and December and Amsterdam in November of this year. My name is Lauren Berry, and I'll be your host for today's session titled Analyzing and Responding to the Impact of COVID-19 on Clinical Trials. First, I'll cover some quick housekeeping items. If you experience difficulties with audio or advancing slides, please refresh your screen by hitting F5 on your keyboard. If you're experiencing other technical issues, please hit the question mark button to receive assistance. At any time during the presentation, you can submit questions into the Q&A window, which is on the left-hand side of your screen. In 24 hours, you will receive a link to watch the recording of this session. You can also download a few featured white papers in the resources list box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, let me introduce today's speaker from Medidata. Today, we have Rachel Horovitz. She's the Senior Director of Product Strategy at Medidata. So, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, I'll hand it over to you to begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I'm very excited to be here today. As Lauren mentioned, I will be talking a little bit about the trial impact analytics offering that we have and how we're helping customers navigate the evolving situation of the pandemic. I'm going to first provide some background on Acorn AI and then spend some time on insights that we have been able to generate based on our proprietary data as well as our new trial impact analytics offering. And then I'll walk through some of the ways that Medidata is helping companies address COVID-19 specific challenges as it relates to clinical trials, and then finally dive into the specifics of the trial impact analytics offering that we have launched a few weeks ago to help companies better understand the impact of the pandemic on their trials and help them plan ahead. So in terms of Acorn AI is Medidata's data and analytics division. It provides the foundation to the insights that we're going to talk about here that help our clients navigate the pandemic. It is built on the 20-year foundation of Medidata, which is running more than half of the world's clinical trials with an advanced technology platform, and that captures critical clinical trial information on behalf of our clients. That data that we capture is both clinical and operational, and encompasses 20,000 clinical trials, of which 6,000 are ongoing, and covers 6 million patients across 22,000 facilities and 94 countries. We have also heavily invested in proprietary data pipelines to clean, structure, and seamlessly integrate different types of data and data sources, including real-world data. And we have built on top of that an analytics platform to derive insights for our clients. We have 4 different solution areas built on top of that data. One is intelligent trials, that will be a focus for today. Integrated evidence, which includes things such as synthetic control arms, malady discovery and disease insights, which includes things like using omics to better identify treatment responses of different subpopulations and identify subpopulations. For instance, we worked here with the Castleman's Collaborative Disease Network to use omics, proteomic markers to identify subpopulations that had 3 times the response rate of the rest of the population. And finally, we also offer a solution called Connected Patient, which includes things like treatment analytics. On top of that, we have built a team of industry experts and clinicians, includes people from that have worked with regulatory agencies, data scientists, and biostatisticians to really make sure that we are driving the best insights that we can for the key challenges that our customers are facing and the answers that they're looking to find. I'm going to talk a little bit about the intelligent trials portfolio of offerings right now, and that is the one that focuses on improving the speed, success, and quality of trials. This focuses on 3 areas and also leverages the data that I've talked about before, which includes the 20,000 clinical trials as well as the 6,000 ongoing ones, includes analysis of the protocol and cost data that we have access to, as well as the linked external data I talked about. And the 3 areas here that we help our clients with are 1, study design, 2, study feasibility, and 3, performance analytics. Study design is meant to really help optimize a trial, both from a scientific as well as an operational perspective. So that means improving the disease understanding by using the clinical data that we have side by side, for instance, with real-world data, and understanding or validating endpoints that can be used for a clinical trial, and also looking into things such as study complexity based on all the data that we have access to from clinical trials, and look at the site and patient burden to help minimize those burdens while improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of the trial. The second area is study feasibility. This is to help accelerate enrollment and select the best countries and sites for our clients. We do this by leveraging not only the historical benchmark information that we have on other sites and trials, but also we have built our own indication-specific predictive models to better select the best sites and countries for a trial. And lastly, the third area, and this is the one that's very relevant for today, is performance analytics. This is an offering that is meant to help companies track ongoing trials versus changing industry conditions. So we all know that there are, when you start a trial, a situation can be very different from a few months down the road when there has been additional, for instance, study starts at a given site, or more competition within an indication, or new approvals. And so all of this matters, and there needs to be a way for companies to understand the changing situations and get alerts so that they can better understand how to take action and take action early. And so for COVID-19, what we have done here is launched a specific offering with regards to COVID-19 as a spin-off of that solution to really address the specific questions and needs that arise from the pandemic. And we have focused in on a few metrics that really help companies better understand the situation and plan ahead. Some of the data that we have actually published insights on, and this is also the data that we leverage in the trial impact analytics offering. One of the metrics that we look at in terms of trial activity is new patients entering trials, the new subject accrual. And we have published this in a biweekly paper for the last few weeks. And what you see here is both year-over-year, March 2020 versus 2019, difference in subject accrual, as well as for April 2020 and April 2019. We will be publishing the May figures in about 2 weeks. And if you look at an overall level across all countries, across all therapeutic areas, you can see that in March, the impact year over year was negative 65%. And that impact increased over time. So in April, we actually saw almost an 80% decrease in the average number of new patients entering trials. You can also see that across countries and across therapeutic areas, the impact has been significant year over year. But you can also see, like for China, for instance, and South Korea, those are areas where we have seen a little bit of recovery. So China went from a negative 68% year over year impact to negative 33% in April, and South Korea similarly saw less of a marked impact in April. We also saw a slight difference in the impact on different therapeutic areas. So in March, for instance, the impact was not as pronounced on some of the therapeutic areas. That impact again strengthened in April, but anti-infectives, infectious diseases, as well as oncology remain less impacted than other therapeutic areas. We also look at metrics such as visit rates. So for visit rates, that means what does trial activity look like in terms of patients actually being able to make their visits. And so what we saw here is almost a 30% decrease in visits per study subject between April of this year versus October of last year. So what you can see on the left-hand side is globally the blue line that represents the negative 30% decrease, and similarly the numbers for China and the US. And then we also look at that split by different therapeutic areas, and so oncology as well as all the other therapeutic areas. By the time we're in April, again, that decrease in visits per subject is almost the same across the different therapeutic areas. And we also publish more detail on some of the other breakouts in our paper, and if you have any interest in that, you can read that and also reach out to us with any questions. What we saw in that data in terms of clinical trial activity corresponds with what we can all read in the news today about the impact that COVID-19 is having on biopharma and clinical trials as well as patients. There were public announcements of changes in R&D plans, pauses, delays in study starts, site activation, and patient enrollment, and then also patients missing visits and procedures due to COVID-19. Not only has this resulted in operational impacts and challenges, but the pandemic has also been quoted to impact actual trial success. And so for AVEO Oncology, the COVID-19 was cited as a reason for the study failure of one of their drugs. Finally, we wanted to understand not only the impact on biopharma, but also the impact on sites that are actually working on running those clinical trials. And what we did here is we launched a survey in late April to about 10,000 personnel at investigator sites globally. And within a week, we had about 1,000 respondents. And so of those respondents, just very quickly in terms of breakdown in demographics, they're about 58% from the US, 24% from Asia, and then the rest split among the UK, Europe, South America, Middle East, and Africa. And the respondents are mainly study coordinators at 73%, and then 11% investigators, and then we also had some other site staff roles present. So as we can all assume, not only is COVID-19 impacting ongoing trials, but also the ability to initiate new trials. And what we really wanted to understand are the key concerns for site staff, so ranging from the ability to enroll new patients, to the supply of investigational products, to financial concerns, for instance. And the top concerns cited by site staff in terms of clinical trials were not only the ability to recruit and enroll patients, which you can see are the green ones on the bottom, but then also financial implications, not only from delayed studies, but also from canceled studies. On a positive note, there is actually a strong confidence in the supply of IMP or investigational medical devices. And so what we wanted to do as the next step was understand not only the concerns that the site staff face, but also the actions that sites have taken to deal with those challenges. And so the top 3 actions that sites have been taking to deal with COVID-19 situation correspond to initiatives taken by industry. One is halting new patient recruitment for ongoing trials. That was cited by 63%. Switching patients to virtual or telemedicine was cited by 45%, and then delaying the study by 43%. Now, in terms of COVID-19 testing, both for active and past infection, that number is actually relatively low. Only 8% have tested patients for active infection and only 3% for prior infection. We also asked our respondents to name the one thing that could help them better meet their clinical trial milestones that is currently not in place. And one of those raised included examining the global impact of decisions. And so although COVID-19 is widespread across the globe, not all parts of the world are impacted in the same way at the same time. And so it is important to make decisions in a way that doesn't unnecessarily impact research in areas where it might be safe to continue screening and enrolling new patients. This is a key area that we are focusing on as part of the trial impact analytics solution I mentioned earlier. So this is really centered on helping our customers make better decisions when it comes to focusing their efforts and allocating resources and making decisions in terms of where and when to engage sites so that not all studies have to be halted and paused globally around the world, which can really impact, as we talked about, not just biopharma companies, but also sites and ultimately the patients that those treatments need to come to. Another suggestion was to adopt telemedicine to accommodate patients who can't visit research centers, and that includes things such as online questionnaires, e-consent, virtual visits, and even things such as sending investigational product to patients. So overall, we know there's a large impact to sites. There are huge implications for patients as well as sponsors and CROs. I will talk a little bit now about what Medidata is doing as a whole to help customers better navigate the challenges that COVID-19 presents for trials. And so the 4 areas that we are focused on at Medidata are: 1, understanding the evolving situation. This is going to be the focus for today. The second one is reconsidering trial design to enable data capture. The third, maintaining supply and quality. And the last, accelerating study startup. So reconsidering trial design really talks about the last point that I mentioned that sites have mentioned as an area that could help them focus on actually achieving their milestones, and that really is increased virtualization for trials. So this could include things such as electronic clinical outcomes assessment, remote consent, but also things such as synthetic control arms, which can really help reduce the need for patient enrollment in cases where patients can't make visits or a trial is at risk because that is happening. And the third area is maintaining supply and quality. And so what we're offering here is ways to adjust supply plans and make sure that the disruption to supply and investigational products can be minimized and also can be adjusted to include additional dispensation of medical products, investigational medical products for patients when they're visiting. And this also includes offerings that focus more on remote or centralized monitoring and provide better oversight for companies when the CRAs can't really go to the sites. And so this provides better oversight for a specific study to ensure the safety for patients, but also the data integrity that is required for the clinical trial. And lastly, accelerating studies. What we're doing here is helping our clients develop trial budgets faster and also determine fair site payments based on both site effort, but then also benchmarks for site payments. And so I'm going to focus now on the first part of these 4 areas, which is understanding the evolving situation. So trial impact analytics, again, this really takes advantage of the 6,000 active trials from the 20,000 trials that we have overall and across over 90 countries. And so what this helps do is better understand and navigate the evolving situation to provide real-time insights and then also help plan ahead. So in terms of situation insights, what we do here is we benchmark performance of a customer's trials in an indication or across indications and benchmark that versus the competition to help you understand how you're performing and gain that insight in real time. We have heard that this is very difficult for clients to understand. They might know, how they're doing, but they don't know what that means relative to the rest of the industry and whether their performance is actually better or worse than what they should be doing. The second part of this, once you know what is actually going on, is the need to help forecast both impact and recovery. And so what we do here is we help our customers understand by looking at both country and site level tracking, which countries and sites might be coming back online. And then also looking at leading indicators of recovery and slowdown to better understand what you can do earlier. And I will go into all of these in a lot more detail. So in terms of metrics that we are using to fuel these analyses, I've already talked about 2 of those. That is new subject accrual, so new patients entering trials at study sites. This gives an indication of of whether new patients can actually participate in trials. We also look at data entry, so change in data points collected. Visits, this is another one I already talked about, so change in visit rate, which looks at trial activity from the perspective of whether activity can be continued for patients that are already in trials. And then the last one is quality metrics, so we can look at things such as data lag, query response rates, or STD rates and velocity. The first part of the solution that I will talk about now is that real-time situation insights. So this is the benchmarking of the performance and really helping to dimensionalize the impact that COVID-19 is having on a client's studies. So what we're looking at here is, what we're trying to do is help our customers understand, what does my performance look like versus the industry? What does normal or okay even look like in the situation? And am I doing okay as compared to the industry? Is it that my country or site selection choices might be impacting my performance, or is it study-specific aspects? And so what we can look at here is we can look at both at the portfolio overall, across TAs, how are you doing in your TAs versus competition at an aggregate? Are there specific disease areas that might be problem areas for you as measured by trial activity where you're actually performing worse in industry, or are there ones where you're doing better? And this really helps you better understand which indications to focus on. We can also look at performance within a specific disease area versus industry. And so you can look at how you're doing in an aggregate, again, looking at that trial activity, for instance, subject accrual, visit rates, and then you can understand what countries are driving your over or underperformance at that disease area level. So there might be countries in which your trial performance is doing better. There might be countries in which you're doing worse. And you can drill down to the site level. So let's say in a given country, if you're over or underperforming, you can actually look at which sites are driving that difference in performance and whether you are performing better or worse or on par with sites. And this really helps understand whether, if you're doing worse at a given site for an indication versus the industry, that might help alert you to the fact that there might be trial-specific changes that you can make in terms of execution, or maybe changes to the design that will help accelerate the study if you are really doing worse at a given site, and if it just is that you have picked sites that are doing comparatively a lot worse versus the industry, that can inform your selection choices and how you might want to reallocate your efforts. You can also drill down to the study level performance and see which studies are driving that performance difference within a disease area. Again, you can look at countries and sites and drill down to understand what is going on. So in terms of decisions, this real-time situation insights provides, it is one, across a portfolio you can understand which disease areas to focus on, which ones are your problem areas. Within a specific disease area, you can look at which studies and countries to focus on. If you're doing better or worse in a given country, you may either want to focus efforts or drill down into site level performance to see if the performance is driven by selection or execution. And within a study, again, you can drill down and understand what countries and sites does that study performance depend on, and that can help inform allocation of resources to countries and sites and help you plan interventions if the performance at a given site is worse than for industry. Once you understand the current situation, it is really important to also understand how the situation is changing. So are there certain geographic areas that are turning into pandemic hotspots? Are there areas that are recovering? What sites should you focus on in your recovery planning? And so what you can see here on the right-hand side is a heat map, and that helps you grasp very quickly at a high level what is happening in geographic areas. So are those areas seeing an uptick or a downturn in terms of clinical trial activity? That we can layer on top your trial footprint to understand what is your footprint as it relates to the areas that are seeing either an uptick or a downturn, to help you plan better and reallocate as needed. And then if an area is seeing an uptick, we can then look at site-specific metrics and identify sites that are ramping up activity and look at the footprint that you have at those sites. So what we have heard here is that a lot of effort is being spent in terms of understanding which sites are coming back online so that companies can restart trials that they have put on hold. And there is a huge manual effort involved in terms of reaching out through email or calling, and that is a burden both on the teams that are doing that work in terms of the outreach, but then also a huge burden to the sites that have to field potentially several inbound requests to keep answering the questions of whether they are ready to take patients. And so the data that we have, and with all those 6,000 ongoing trials that we have across indications, it is a lot easier to use that data and to see with the data whether there is an uptick in activity or similarly also a downturn in activity. And so the decisions that this can really enable is to whether you should halt or reallocate activity from one region to another, whether there is a need for you to temporarily change your footprint, whether there are new sites that you should be focusing on that are actually seeing an uptick, for instance, in activity that you should take advantage of, and when you should engage sites and where. So again, this is really done by providing a high-level overview of what is happening across the world, where you can drill down into specific geographic areas or down to the state level and look at site performance. The last part of this is really trying to identify earlier what is happening so that you can plan better. And what we are doing here is overlaying our clinical trial data, the impact on clinical trials, with external data. So what we're looking at here are about 20 or so indicators, including things such as epidemiological data, lockdown dates and severity of lockdown, seismic data or economic indicators, and layering that on top of our clinical trial data. And what we're looking to do here is to understand both the correlation of those external indicators with the clinical trial activity, and then also the lag. So, is there, for instance, can you see that if something happens to an indicator, within 2 to 4 weeks, you're going to see a decrease or an uptick in clinical trial activity in a given region. We are also looking at the recovering geographies to see what we can tell based on those areas, and we're looking at recovery curves and then applying those insights and additional analyses to other countries to help develop scenarios. And so what we also need to take into consideration here is potentially differences based on study characteristics, so indication, phase, et cetera. One of the examples of what we have already built in is the epidemiological data as it refers to case rates. And so on the top, you can see the green line is global subject accrual, and the red line is the case rate. And you can see globally, obviously, the case rate at the beginning of the year, pretty flat, and then a huge spike, which corresponds to the decrease in subject accrual. And then if you look below, we actually pulled out China, and you can see that increase in the cases was a lot sooner and spiked a lot earlier. With that, the subject accrual rate came down in China. But as we saw in the data that I covered in the very beginning, China has actually seen an uptick again in their subject accrual as that case rate has come down. And what we're expecting here and what we're trying to do here is we know that there's going to be waves of this across the globe. And as we talked about earlier, not every area is going to be affected at the same time in the same way. So by taking that third step and trying to understand whether there are leading indicators of recovery and slowdown in for geographic areas, that really helps plan ahead and understand when to make decisions and allow our customers to make decisions as early as possible to help them navigate the ongoing impact of the pandemic. So Overall, unfortunately, as we all know, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on clinical trials across all stakeholders, from patients to investigators and site staff, and also sponsors and CROs. There are 4 areas that we are helping our customers to address those trial challenges as it relates to COVID-19. The first one is understanding the evolving situation. That was the one that we focused on for today. The second one is reconsidering trial design to better enable data capture. Again, that includes things such as virtualization, as well as things such as synthetic controls to reduce the need for enrolling patients, and then maintaining quality and supply with better oversight and supply planning, and then accelerating study startup. And the first step to really better navigating that pandemic is to better understand what is happening to trials in real time, and then looking into how to plan ahead and where to plan for recovery, when to engage sites, and where to help trials get back on track and get those treatments to patients and to market faster, and not spend time going in cycles where trials have to be halted again and again across the world over time. So that summarizes my presentation, and thank you very much for listening. I'm going to hand it back over to Lauren for some logistics and then the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel, for an excellent presentation. We have received a few questions already, but we're going to give the rest of you a moment to enter your questions into that Q&A box, which is to the left of your slides. So before we begin the Q&A, first, I would like to run through some brief announcements. First, I'd like to thank Medidata, I apologize, for sponsoring this digital event and for sponsoring the week. Next, I'd like to quickly draw your attention to the face-to-face clinical trial events, which are visiting Philadelphia in October and December of this year, and as well as in Amsterdam in November of this year. Also, please be sure to check out the resources list. There are a few great white papers in there that will add to your Digital Week experience. So let's get back to Rachel into the Q&A. So Rachel, let's see, we've got a few questions in here already, which is great. So the first question, what insights can I gain from your data and analytics that I can't get through other sources?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the key here really is that we are in a unique position as Medidata, having access to those 6,000 ongoing trials. We have the largest data set as it relates to ongoing trials. The largest CRO has, I think, ongoing trials in the range of about 2,500. So what this really helps us do is better understand the evolving situation by looking at all those trials, and that can really help us provide insights to companies in terms of how they're doing, but then also, as we talked about, looking at, for instance, what regions and sites are ramping up without having to do the manual effort of reaching out to sites. And again, this can only be done if you have access to a very large data set that can give you the answers without having to really involve a lot of manual effort.
Perfect, thank you. Next question we have here. Can you please share why you are focused on the metrics that you mentioned?
Yeah, sure. So what we wanted to do first was really understand how patients are impacted by COVID-19 as it relates to trials. And so what we wanted to do was understand both the ability for new subjects and new patients to enter trials, and then also the activity, so understanding whether patients can continue with visits for trials. And this really also helps our customers understand what is happening and what the impact is on their trials. So in terms of subject accrual, that really looks at, again, how many new patients are being screened and how many are entering trials. And with visit rates, we can look at whether those patients that are enrolled in trials are actually making their visits and maintaining their participation. So together, those two metrics really are key and give you a very good understanding of trial activities, which is what you need to understand in this environment to properly allocate resources and plan for recovery.
Perfect, thank you so much. Next question, are you already working on any with any pharma companies? I apologize. And how are you working with them?
Yeah, so we have already working with pharma companies, and there's actually a lot of outreach or inbound that we're getting on this. As I mentioned before, it really is very difficult for our customers to understand the impact and understand whether how they're doing is actually okay and reasonable, or whether they're really off the mark. And so what we help them do first and foremost is to help them understand their performance by providing that benchmarking that I talked about, and to help them understand whether their performance is driven by studies in a given area or specific countries and sites, or whether it might be study-specific aspects if, for instance, you're doing a lot worse at a given site for an indication. And so this really helps them understand where they need to focus their efforts right now. And then the second part of this is what we talked about. We're also really helping our customers understand how to plan ahead and how to start thinking about recovery planning, because the next step really is a lot of companies are getting their trials back from unsuspending their trials. And so they really want to understand where they can focus their efforts in terms of sites, so that they can start to allocate their efforts correctly and try to make up for basically for the lost time.
That's great. Thank you so much. And just a reminder, everyone, the question box is to the left of your slides if you would like to submit a question. Let's see, what's the next question? What trends have you been seeing in the data?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have been publishing the insights that we have in the biweekly perspectives paper, which at this point, given that it has flattened out in terms of response, we're looking at publishing this monthly. But in terms of insights that we have gathered, I think the interesting part really is that there is a slight difference in some of the TAs and the impact on activity. For instance, oncology was less impacted in the beginning, likely due to the severity of the disease and the necessity of patients to receive treatment. And we also saw that, there are signs of recovery in certain geographic areas. It will be important and interesting to maintain that oversight and understand which areas are going to recover, and how waves of the pandemic are going to impact the clinical trials over time. And so this will be something that we will have to keep an eye on over time to understand the impact across geographies, but also across therapeutic areas.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. How do you recommend to do source data verification by auditors during the COVID-19 epidemic?
Yeah, so this might be a question that is better for one of my other colleagues, but we do have solutions, as I talked about, in terms of both remote and centralized monitoring that help look at data to focus efforts in terms of monitoring on areas when for instance, visiting the site is not possible. And so we do have a team, or actually several teams focused on that, and you can also reach out and we can provide more detailed answers for that.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right. It looks like those are all the questions that we have today. So Rachel, I just want to thank you again for a great session and for participating today.
Sure. Happy to.
All right. And if anyone has any additional questions, you can still enter your question into the Q&A box, and we will send those questions to Rachel so that she can answer them directly. Again, this session was recorded. You'll receive a notification in 24 hours when the on-demand session is available for viewing. And before you log off, there will be a survey that pops up, so please feel free to complete that feedback form so that we can continue to improve the Digital Week experience. On behalf of Informa Connect Life Sciences, have a great day.